Hi, I'm Kenichi, and I'd like to talk about ServerSide.swift experience and pitfalls coming from iOS. So here's my agenda today. To start off, I'd like to go over my background and the topic of discussion. Next, I'd like to talk about what I have actually made with ServerSide.swift. And finally, the last topic is what kind of problems I have faced and how I solve them. My name is Kenichi Ueno, and I come from Kyoto, Japan. So here's some sample photo from Kyoto. Actually, I can feel like I'm working in the center of this culture in the Kyoto office. I have been working as an iOS developer for about 8 years for LINE Corporation. And I just began server-side Swift development from the beginning of this year. So I do not have a lot of experience, but I thought it would it's still helpful for beginners. For those who are unfamiliar with LINE Corporation, it is an IT company based in Japan, and whose main service is named LINE, which is a messenger application. And its core feature is very similar in nature to other messenger applications like WhatsApp, WeChat, etc. And we also provide a device named Clova, which is an AI assistant speaker, which is very comparable to Alexa. And they are Clovas, very cute or kawaii, right? Whenever I look at them, I can remember in which country I am working. And it just works as an AI speaker, so it has both microphone and speaker. You can talk to it, and it responds to you. And let me introduce its developer setter and skill store. So you can add your own function to the speaker, and they are called skills. And we provide SDK for third-party developers to help them to develop such skills. And our SDK currently supports Swift, Node.js, Python, Alexa, etc. So why Swift? The short answer is because I love it. So I like to use Swift, and I find it very fun to use it in various fields. So for example, I use it for, of course, for iOS application, and to make command line tools, or to participate in some programming competition like Google Code Jam. Unfortunately, they stopped supporting Swift from this year, but I hope them think again in the future. It actually helped me to learn a bit more about Swift and for the server-side development by using it for this project. So I use Swift to develop the SDK, but this is probably a more important question for employees. Why has the company allowed us to do that? So there are several reasons, and there are several stuff they concern. So first reason is that even if there are little number of server-side Swift developers, if we release it, it can reach more developers. It's simply good. Second stuff they concern is if we can maintain it or not after releasing it. So even though there are a little number of server-side Swift developers inside the company, but we have much more iOS side Swift developers, and they expect to be maintaining it, so it's okay. Third point is lucky for me that our project manager is a bit of a geek herself, big enough of a geek to be interested in those minority languages, even for Alexa as well. And finally, we get to mention our company at this conference. It's also very important because we are hiring worldwide. So Clova SDK is what I have made. So let me explain how the skill works. So there are several players, user, and the device and our platform, and your third-party service, including their server. So at first, a user says something to the speaker, and the speaker sends the audio data to the platform, and the platform will analyze what the user said. And then it sends the data as a form of intent via HTTPS request to your server. And it's important to mention it's limited to the, it's required to be HTTPS server for the security purpose. And your server is supposed to process the result and return its response in a JSON format. And our platform will receive it and send the data to the device, and the device will respond to the user via voice. So let me break down the actual tasks of your server. So the server, at first, it needs to verify the request to make sure the request is coming from our official server. And then the server needs to extract the necessary information from the JSON. And then you need to process the intent. This is where your business logic is applied. And then you need to return the JSON. And our SDK lets the developer to focus on the business logic. Let me go into a little bit of detail. So this is a URL of our SDK for Swift. I will not show this URL again, so if you want to check it out, please take a photo here. So at first, you need to add a dependency in your package.swift, or you can just clone it to try it out. And then in your service, you need to write some event handlers. And you need to set some environment variables like a port and application ID for verification. Of course, you can hard code them if you want, but it's basically a bad idea. Just use the environment variable in server side. Then you can run the server. Okay. So our SDK's core feature can be listed like this. So it runs as a web server with Kitura. Actually, it does not necessarily to contain web server part. In fact, some of our SDK, like Python SDK, does not contain any web server. But I thought for Swift developers, most of them are not trained to deploy it. They do not know much about the server side. So I thought it would be better for most of them to include the web server part to make it easier for them to use it. And it can handle message verification. It also provides a struct that conforms to codable. And so you can use struct to extract information from the JSON request or to construct a JSON response from your struct. And the core part, of course, it's pure Swift and it's library. So this is another question, so why Kitura? The starting point was when I met people from IBM, including Ian, at Swift Tokyo. And it was, and I picked the brain about Kitura, and it was clear that it met our requirement. It can run as a web server, and it can verify, it can be used for every purpose of our SDK. And I also liked the part that they provide, IBM provides a set of libraries, modules, for example, Common Crypto, OpenSSL, and even a Docker image named Swift Ubuntu Docker. And I expect them work well together. And I also like the Slack channel named Swift at IBM. They have a big community, and they have a good support. Their response time is pretty fast. But I actually have not compared with other frameworks in detail. So if you have a particular recommendation for alternative, I'm all ears. But honestly, our next step is not replacing Kitura with another framework, but maybe to put some documentation to support them to use any framework or focus on the serverless solution. Okay, so far is my background. So you can imagine in what kind of situation I tackled server-side-swift. So from here, I will share my experience where I faced some problems and how I solved them. And those problems came either the SDK itself or a sample application that uses the SDK. So the first problem you might face is a server deployment. For iOS developers, it's another world. So, and we had some requirements, like it needs to be able to support HTTPS, and it need to be able to run Swift. And I wanted to deploy it from a private repository. So the problem is coming from our sample application. Imagine you are writing your own service that has a dependency on the SDK. So in that case, your code must be maybe private. You don't really want to publish a code in development. And at that moment, I also didn't want to publish my SDK as well. So the typical solution using Heroku is to push your code on GitHub and write all dependencies. But the solution was what I couldn't use. So I looked for another solution. And a very simple solution that can be used in your development stage is to use nglog. It can make an SSH tunnel from your local machine, and you can have a single HTTPS endpoint for that. So it's quite simple and very quick. And only the problem is, obviously, it's not scalable. And you need to keep running your own machine while you want to serve your service. So here is obviously more flexible solution to use Docker and SPM. So some parts like Heroku, IBM Cloud supports Docker, and if you could upload your Docker image, you can host an HTTP service with that. And there is a good Swift Ubuntu Docker image that enables to run and build Swift. And I found SPM can contain both your sample project and the SDK at the same time in a single repository. So, let me show how it's possible. So SPM can contain either or both executable and library. So if you contain a sample application as an executable, you can just immediately clone the project and you can run it. Then, so executable is runnable. And you can also contain your SDK as a library. So if you add the dependency in your project and if you run the Swift build, it just pulls the library part from the URL. So it was good for me to meet my requirement to keep everything private. So before stepping into next problem, let me explain a bit about our architecture. So the question is how to let the developer know what to write in a natural way. So I defined a protocol, and I made the start server function to take the protocol, so that the developer need to have some instance that conforms to the protocol, and I defined several functions that developers need to write in the protocol. So here is a question: how to enable asynchronous process? And the purpose is to tell the developer that they can handle them in a natural way. So the direct solution, usually it is a direct intuition. You get that take an argument, take a request in the argument and returns a response, but obviously it's the asynchronous processing is not to be done in this way. So just have a next function in argument, and then they can call it when the response is ready. But it's almost the same as Kitura provides. So this is the actual code from our SDK. The next takes a callback function. So they can make some request, asynchronous request before they return the response. And typical situation that you need asynchronous processing is to make a server-to-side server request. And this question comes, how to make a post request. It sounds very easy, and I think it doesn't even look like a question, but my suggestion is to use a Bible library for that, because I think most of iOS developers can start writing URL session.shares.data task to make a post request immediately, but it's not 100% implemented for Linux. So you need to check how much it's implemented whenever you use a foundation framework. So the real pitfall here is, I think it's mentioned in earlier talk as well, but you can write the code, you can build it, the compiler never complains, but it just doesn't work in the Linux. And the second question is how to verify, how to utilize the RSA algorithm. So here's, again, just look for a proper framework. I think most of the framework can cover a basic scenario, but if your planner or your company requires you to write a very unique way of verification, you need to write code by yourself. In that case, maybe you will need to use a different framework for different OS, so that's a difficult part. If you need to write OpenSSL, maybe you will need to look up the manual page a lot. So it's tough part, but just good luck. So when you want to write security framework, some of its function requires your project, the macOS. In the macOS environment, it requires it to be greater than or equal to 10.12. But how to indicate it is another question here. The basic way, when you are developing something for iOS, you can just simply set the target build version in the Xcode. But if you do that for the server-side project, every time you run Swift package generate Xcode, it resets the field. So here is several solutions. First one is, as the compiler suggests you can put sharp available attribute in the code. But if you don't like to put something in the code, there's another solution to put some build options. But concept of this, you need to put the same options every time, like whenever you run Swift build or Swift test or Swift run. So it's a bit of work. So I think this is a case-by-case solution. Finally, when you develop for Linux, how to test it is important stuff. And it's a bit hard that you write your code on Mac OS and you run the test it. You run it for Mac OS naturally. If you really want to develop and iterate that, write the code, run the test, I found the efficient way is develop inside Docker. In Docker, you can open your favorite editor, rewrite the code, and run the do Swift run, and then it runs. And when you write a Swift test, it tests for Linux environment. And for the test, just edit XA test manifest.swift and just make sure it contains all necessary tests. And again, make sure you run the test for each environment. It's, for example, as I mentioned earlier, if you use some functions only for macOS, it's not implemented in Linux. It might fail only in Linux environment. And this is an example of the test file, test manifest file. So looking at the first one, it's XC test manifest.swift. It contains 2 test suites. And if you want to add a test only for Linux, here is where you add the test. And you can also redefine that all test with other name. And if you want to exclude some test for Linux environment. And then in Linux main.swift, you can find that file in test folder and just pass the object to the xct main function. Okay, so far the problems I solved, but there are some unsolved problems for me, so it's kind of homework for me. First one is I introduced next, but I'm curious if there is a way to force them to call it properly. I mean, it's the next function is supposed to be called exactly only once when they are ready to return the response. But you can make it work properly, like you can ignore the second call, or you can call it instead of the developer when it was not called, if it was not called. But compiler will not complain about it, so I wonder if there is a way. And second one is what is a more efficient way to develop for Linux environment. I talked to Stanislav, and maybe C-Lion will be the tool I need. So I will check it out later. Thank you for listening. That's it. And my name is Kenichi Ueno. I'm happy to hear your questions if you have.